So why would you use EFT to pay vendors from GP? Electronic banking is very common nowadays, and to do the setup for EFT and GP is a very easy process. It takes very little time. You will certainly save time printing and mailing out checks. Your vendors will be happy to receive payment promptly to their accounts. They won't need to deposit your checks. And for the user who is responsible for reconciling the bank, they will be very pleased to see that the entire EFT batch is one amount to clear, as opposed to all individual checks. So it should save a lot of time at your workplace. There are a couple steps to perform before you can start using EFTs. The first step is to contact your financial institution. You will need to obtain a 10-digit company ID or originator ID, and it usually takes a couple business days to obtain. So you usually want to start by contacting them and letting them know that you wish to pay vendors via EFT. Be very clear with them that you wish to submit a file as opposed to entering the EFTs directly on their website. And ask questions about cost. Typically there's a cost associated per file, as well as based on the number of payments within that file. Different financial institutions require the file format to be specific for their institution. So obtain some documentation on what file formats are accepted. And you may also want to ask questions about what is required to submit a test file. Many institutions require a test file to be submitted before you can start using it with real data. Another step is to contact your vendors. So you're going to need their banking information in order to process payments. The only information you need is their transit routing number and bank account number. But if you'd like to send out remittances via email, you should also ask for an email address. So we're going to jump into GP now and actually go through the setup for the checkbook as well as for our vendor, and then process a payment and submit the remittance via email. Alright, we're in GP, and in the financial module under cards, I want to open up the window for checkbook. I already have a checkbook set up for operating, and what you'll notice in the bottom right corner is the button for the EFT bank. We're going to click on that, and I've already populated some of this information. When you first open up this window, the bank country region will be set to none, and all of these fields will be grayed out. You have to select Canada from the drop-down, or whichever bank country region that you're setting up. You'll need to populate, at the very least, this transit routing number field, your bank account number field, your bank company name, so this is your company name, and the company ID number. This is that 10-digit company ID or originator ID I spoke of earlier. Depending on your financial institution, you may also be required to put in your currency code and possibly your data center code. So some of that information will be in the documentation from your financial institution. Because we're focused on setting this up for payables, we're going to go into our payables options window. And in this window, we have an option, first of all, whether we want to have our EFT payment numbers use this number to begin with. So you can strip out some zeros here if you feel that there's too many. You can shorten that up. I recommend using EFT numbers as opposed to check numbers. That way, at a quick glance, it's obvious that a payment is an EFT. The file format section is where we actually have to set up the file formatted specifically for our institution. So I'm just going to type in a new ID here. This is just an identifier, and when I tab off, it recognizes it's not been set up, so I want to add it. In the window that opens, there's a format type drop-down, and you're going to see that GP has a number of out-of-box file formats available for the large financial institutions in Canada. So we have Bank of Montreal, CIBC, National Bank of Canada, RBC, TD, and with GP 2016 there's one set for Scotiabank. I'm going to select National Bank of Canada. This happens to be a file format commonly referred to as CPA 005, used by a lot of the credit unions. And because I'm using an out-of-box format type, I don't need to actually do any of the setup down below. So this will save a lot of time. I'm going to click Save and close this window. And the other thing you'll need to fill in this window is the location to where the file should be generated. So we're going to be generating a domestic payment file. And I've gone ahead and set up a folder called EFT for webinar, and payment will be my the name of my file. Where you can go to do this is just clicking on the file folder here at the right, selecting the location you wish, and putting in a file name that you'd like to see. Okay, so we're done setting up our checkbook. So I'm just going to click OK and get out of that window. And next we're going to move on to setting up our vendor. Okay, so in purchasing, under cards, we're going to go to our vendor card. My first vendor here is vendor ABC. This is the vendor that I'd like to set up. So that vendor has provided me their banking information. I now need to enter it. Now your vendors may have multiple addresses. You can see here we have a primary address, and down here our remit to address, we actually have a different address ID set up. This may not always be the case. You may have just one address for your vendors, but if you do have multiple, please ensure you put the EFT information on the remit to address ID. I like to go to the vendor master window here and just drill back on this remit to address ID. So we're now in the vendor address maintenance window. I'm going to click on the EFT bank button and enter my vendor's banking information. So Canada is the bank country or region. It needs to be the same country region that we set up for our checkbook. The only information we need to enter in here is the vendor's transit routing number and bank account number. You may at times receive a 9-digit transit routing number. If you try to enter 9 digits, you'll likely get this message saying it must be 8 characters. The 3-digit code will automatically pad a 0 in front of it, so just put in the 8 characters. Let's put in a bank account number, and we're going to click OK, and that's all that we need. We don't actually have to put in the financial institution name that they're using. Bank account and transit routing number is all that's required. This vendor, if they've given me an email address, I can enter that from this internet addresses area. I can put in the email address here, and if you wish to be included as well on the email with the remittance, you could always put your own email address in this PCC line. So we're going to save our EFT information, and we're back at our vendor master window. Down at the very bottom, there's an email button. Now, although we've set this vendor up with an email address, we have not yet enabled the vendor to receive a remittance by email. So it's important that we go to this particular window, and down here in the bottom section where it says send forms as email, we want to mark off vendor remittance. It's going to be using a message ID called remittance, so I've gone ahead and set this up in advance, and I would like the attachment to go as a PDF. So I will say OK to that, save, and my vendor is now set up. I can move on to actually performing a payment by EFT. Okay, so we're still in purchasing. I'm just going to expand the transactions area. For those of you who are processing checks currently, what you're going to find is the EFT process is very, very similar. There's only a couple of different steps involved. If you're used to starting a check run from the Select Checks window or the Edit Check Batch or the Edit Check window, you can do so again with an EFT batch. For today, I'm going to start in the Edit Check Batch window, and I'm going to type in a brand new batch called Webinar, and we're going to go ahead and add this batch. So the first difference between an EFT batch and a check batch is this radio button here. When we're setting up our batch, we need to select EFT as our payment method. Okay, I saved my batch, and now I can actually tab off and take a look at my vendors that I have enabled. This vendor ABC we have set up, so I'm going to mark it. I have one amount for $50 to pay. So I've gone ahead and marked it, and I'm going to click process. Now this window, although it's the same as in a check run, it's a little bit different in that our check number is now grayed out. You can see our EFT payment number that we had specified earlier is populated in there. And I'm going to go ahead and process this. The window that opens is the Payables remittance window. You may be familiar with this window when you've had a check that had too much information on the stub that it wouldn't all print. You would have to then go to this window and actually print a remittance form. In this case, I've set up the vendor to receive it via email, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. By default, this window will always open with the alignment form radio button marked. We don't want that. We want the remittance form. So we're going to change it, and down below we're going to mark send document in email, print if mail cannot be sent, and I'm going to unmark the print document. I only want to send it in an email. When I hit the process button, it's now asking me where would I like the exception report to be printed, and I'm just going to say up on screen, and we'll just give that a moment. And here is our exception report. So it says document sent successfully. Now we're still in this window. I can certainly mark post and process. I may first want to actually go check my sent items to see that the remittance did in fact send properly. For the purpose of today, I'm just going to go ahead and process this so I can post it. I have an EFT payment register report that will open. So it's done posting, and we can see in here on our payment register we have this payment number EFT1 for vendor ABC for $50. So the next step, you can see we've gone kind of through the list. We've started with our edit check batch. We went to that print checks window. We went to the process remittance window where we posted our payment. The last area is this generate EFT file. So this is where I'm actually going to create the file in order to upload to my financial institution. I select this window. You can see I have a series of purchasing and sales. We're in payables, so we'll leave that set to purchasing. We're going to select our checkbook, and in here I can see all of the batches that I've posted. I only have the one so far for webinar. Now this is important. I talked about earlier that you can you will be charged for every file you submit. So if you've gone ahead, finished a batch, but you haven't yet generated the file, and somebody runs in and asks you to add another payment, you can go ahead and process another batch, and when you get in here, you can mark several at the same time. Those will all get included into one file, so you're only getting charged for that one upload. So I've marked this. On the right hand side, you can see some important fields. We have transmission date, so the date that I'm actually going to be uploading this, as well as my settlement date, so what date will vendors be paid. You may want to check with your financial institution. Some may require the settlement date to be a couple days beyond the transmission date. They may also have restrictions on how far in advance you can transmit a file. So certainly contact them or obtain some documentation on that. When I click the Generate EFT File button, a message is going to open up telling me that my file has been generated with one transaction and it's in the following location. So when I go to that location, we can see it here. It has this particular file, and if I open up, you can see it's a file format that National Bank will accept. This will certainly look different if you're banking with another financial institution. Now, we had originally specified we wanted our file to be called payment. You can see it's automatically appended our checkbook ID, the date, as well as a sequence number at the end, 0001. If you were to generate multiple files in a day, then you're going to see that the next sequence number would be 0002 and so on. This is just to prevent overwriting of any files. You may want to have yet another folder just to keep a history of these files. So once you've uploaded it, you may want to move it to that just to know that it has been uploaded. But you'd certainly want to put some security on this folder. This is where the files are being generated, and in these files it indicates the vendor's banking information. So it's a simple text file that someone could open. Your auditors may ask you questions as far as who has access to this, and you should certainly limit it to users who are able to generate to this location and upload these files to your bank. So the email that was sent out, I'll just bring it up on screen. We can see here it says remittance form attached. This is the message body that we had created with that remittance ID. You can certainly put in more information if you wish, contact information. You can put the payment number, contact us if you need any assistance with that. We specified we wanted the remittance to be included as a PDF. So we'll open up our PDF here. And this is the out-of-box GP remittance form. So you can see it has some blue font. It does make some references to check. So I usually recommend removing all those references. As I mentioned earlier, your check stub, if it can't include all information, it will use a remittance form. So the remittance form will still be used, and it's the exact same remittance form that you use for EFT as for checks. So rather than referencing checks or EFT, you may just want to reference payments. So just a quick recap. The first step you'd want to do is to contact your financial institution. Let them know that you want to submit EFT files for payment. You're going to need to request that 10-digit company ID or originator ID. And once you obtain it, you can enter all that information in your checkbook maintenance window. You'll also want to send a request out to your vendors for banking information, including their bank account numbers, transit routing number, and if you wish to send remittances by email, be sure to obtain an email address that they wish the remittance form to be sent. When you're actually processing your EFT batch, remember that first step is to mark the radio button for your batch type to be an EFT. And once your batch has been posted, you'll need to still generate the EFT file and submit that to your financial institution.